And boom, according to that, I am live. My name is Hugo Simon. It's good to see you all tonight. This is me with the working new microphone and the setup. I actually don't have an excuse tonight like I normally do for being late. Well, other than I'm always a little bit late. But yeah, I just was kind of taking it a little bit too easy. I was watching some YouTube videos. I know recent weeks I've said I didn't have many topics, and I was even ready to play music at the end of the show. Tonight, I have lots of topics, so let's get through it. I should be. Let me just make sure. Last week I thought I was live and I talked for 15 minutes where I missed everything. Yeah, it turns out I wasn't broadcasting, but I do appear to be live indeed. Did I forget to turn the thing on? Says Andrew Moboy. No, I am actually now scheduled live. One thing, I don't know why, but it won't let me fix the white balance on the camera tonight, which means it might flicker and I might change color at times, but that's just a thing. It's a feature, not a bug. Good to see so many people already in the comments. It has been an eventful week. I mean, not just the regular coronavirus and whatnot. It's actually funny now. I suppose you have to be a little bit sensitive with the titles that you put on videos. For example, I could have mentioned 20 sumo wrestlers save a woman from attempted suicide, but of course you can't put suicide in there. I could have mentioned the NHK racist children's show. Again, that probably would have gotten flagged, so I kind of had to elude. And there I go, dropping color, and there it goes, coming back. Oh dear. Oh, and I want to fix it. I want to fix it, but it won't let me fix it. And let me just check. And it won't, especially won't let me do it on the fly. That's annoying. Anyway, I might change color tonight. And on top of that, there were 70 escaped monkeys. So really, you couldn't have asked for more news this week, really. So we'll go through that and all the other stories. Actually, quite a lot going on. I have opinions about everything. Except maybe the monkeys, but you know. First, let's see who's here in the comments. We've got Andrew Morboy, good to see you as always, who watches this show every Sunday in order to get to sleep, I'm sure. You can always sort of tell, you are always good enough to tell everybody when you're about to pass out, so thank you for that, but I do always appreciate you being there in the comments. King Bilby, good to see you. Quentin Rankit, also good to see you. Who else we got here? We've got Mr. Cordy Chep, who is so very tired. Well, you've come to the doctor. Who else do we have? We have got Sergeant Bilko. Good to see you indeed. We've got who else? Lysander 45. Good to see the recent hotspots for COVID cases in Beijing that flared are only a few kilometers from where you live. Oh, so you're in the lockdown neighborhood. Well, that kind of sucks. That said, at least China seems to take it pretty seriously when it comes to locking down, especially in Beijing. So I assume that in itself is going to be a hardship, but. Yeah, good to have you there in the comments. Good to have you with us, Lysander 45. Who else we got in here? We've got lots of people just seeing all the old comments saying that they were waiting. Still, we've got Shubus, indeed. Thank you for confirming that I'm live. Buenos dias, there in Panama. Good to have you in the comments. We've got Bayer McNeil. Good to see you, sir. Well, you've had a busy week, haven't you? Well, I guess we're going to talk about that pretty early. I'm like, well, who knows? You could have come here for the escaped monkeys or the sumo wrestler. Rescuers, and they are going to be featured as well, don't worry. But if you hear about the NHK flap, of which Baye has become a high profile contributor actually, and I'll be super curious to actually see Baye's comments below this. So yes, looking forward to that. We've got Milchman too. Who else we got? Believe in Yourself, good to see you. Remino, hey, indeed. We've got Simon Ochanoma. Did I miss anybody? I always miss some people. I'll try to come back. Carlos Diamante, good to see you, sir, indeed, as well. And please remember, as always, say hello. I love it when people say hello. It's just nice to see who's there. Also remember that if you want to grab my attention, if you want to ask me a question or make a comment towards me or request a topic or anything like that, at Mark Yuko Simon, and in the comments that I see, it will look orange, it will look extra important. So if you want a super important comment, at Mark Yuko Simon, and that's good. I think we will just dive straight into it, to quote somebody who's been on YouTube longer than me. There's quite a lot to get through tonight. One reason I was late tonight was I was actually just playing around with some, I've been running quite a lot lately and enjoying that. And, there it is. Maybe I can fix the white balance. Now that's too red, but if I do that, and now it's going to stay. Boom, I fixed it. Ha! Sometimes I fix, well, I generally do fix them. It takes time, but we get there in the end. One reason I was late tonight was so I've been running a lot lately. In fact, today I actually did my longest run. It was quite good. I was, not going too crazy in terms of speed. Just got a spot in between the rain. We've got rainy season has definitely started in Tokyo this week. I love to listen to music when I run. I actually used to DJ drum and bass, and the great thing about drum and bass music is it's roughly like from 165 to 175 BPM. Hip hop is anything from like, of course it can be super slow, but generally around like 88 through like 110 is hip hop music. So there is a bit of an overlap point. And I listen to an app called Pace DJ when I run, and I set the run for the sort of pace that basically it plays music. To me, it's like being at a concert or just like listening to something where I just run in time with the beat. And generally, I find the sweet spot tends to be running at about 166 BPM. Maybe if I want to push at the end, I'll increase it or maybe even drop it, but it'll play things at a half time, so it'll play 83 BPM music or 82 BPM music as well as 166. So apart from the fact I've been listening to a lot of music lately, which has been great while I've been running. In fact, that's one of the reasons I like running is that it's just a chance to go out and listen to music. I also thought, well, if I'm making tracks every now and then, I just made up some loops tonight. I just made some drum beats and put a bass line and a couple of layers on top, and nothing flash. No, I didn't play around with it much. I made the loops yesterday, and just tonight I put out the track, in fact, right before the show. In fact, if there's time, I might even play it right at the end if I can figure out a way to play it through this, which there always is a way. But that's a thing that I did this evening, so you can check out the link to that in Twitter and Facebook if you are interested. It's just a pretty simple sort of jazzy sounding drum and bass track, but yes indeed, Mr. Cordy Chap, I can make myself I guess I could make myself turn any color technically, but that's not what the show is about. We have a lot to get through tonight. I am starting late, so let's get into it. Why did I tweet CNN? Probably somebody had a tweet that was like, oh, I want to tweet this, but I certainly didn't want to tweet the CNN logo. Oh, this is why. Although, yeah, it looks like this was probably featuring something else. Perhaps this was referring to the Tokyo Black Lives Matter march today, which, again, Mr. McNeil was participating in and tweeting about. Looks like it was very well attended. Sorry, I couldn't be there myself today, but looks like there were thousands who attended, and it came off pretty well. It was well featured on NHK News as well. They particularly talked to a half, I believe, well, her father was Central African Republic or was Congo Democratic Republic of Congo, one of the two, and mother is Japanese. And not so much talking about police brutality per se, but just talking about the issues of the perception of black people in Japan, and stereotypes and whatnot. So that was pretty well covered. And, this is in addition to the marches that are happening everywhere. Huge marches in New Zealand, in Australia, UK, obviously, happening in different ways in different places. Interesting to see. I guess we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go later on. I'm guessing that's what that is. It's just a big CNN logo. Oh, and look at that. That is a tweet from By McNeil himself. Indeed, there were thousands there today. It was a very big mark. I think it went from Yoyogi, right? But yeah. Lysander 45, how's the ankle doing? Asking, yes, I tore my Achilles back in March, and I was out for I couldn't walk for 3 days, and I didn't run for 2 months. I didn't start running until May. Now I'm running every second day, and I'm increasing, I'm pushing it a bit more, not every time, but I'm increasing distance, or I'm increasing my speed, and yeah, it's actually pretty solid right now, so yeah, it's good. Thank you for asking. Andrea Moboya, is the plant behind me okay? It's looking a bit brownish. I guess it does need some water. I do water it every second day. It's got a thing. Oh, that plant is like 5 years old. So it's sort of like the fronds die and the new ones pop up, and I just keep watering it every second day. So it's doing okay. By McNeil, 3,500 today. So excellent turnout in Yoyogi, I believe is where it was marching from. And actually through Shibuya, I remember I saw some tweets and some photos. So congrats on that. Good job to the organizers. And yes, well, I guess this is where I did a tweet this evening talking about the apology from this NHK show, but I should probably come back to that. So that's going to come up Well, let me dig through. Oh, by the way, for those asking about me running, I did a long run today. That was actually 8.6 kilometers, which I actually ran like an extra kilometer after, but that was with my son on his bicycle, so it was kind of a warm down, so I didn't count it. But that was not bad. Anyway, that was me today. Well, let's get into it, starting out with the NHK flap, because that is a story that I think we're all waiting for. So let me come back here. I did include definitely here the summary of the show. Now, will this allow me to show all three of the pictures that I took with it? Maybe not. Well, look, doesn't matter. There is a show that I've recommended many times on this show called Children's News. It used to be on every Sunday evening. They changed the name recently to The World Now, and I think it's changed the format a little bit. From it used to be kind of aimed strictly at kids, and it was, there would be a mum and dad, and they'd be talking about international news stories. And what I've said this numerous times. In fact, I think even a week ago, before I'd even seen this, I'd actually talked about how much I love the show. And the reason that I love the show is that the people that they have who put together the explanations of news in it are so good at what they do. Both for domestic and foreign stories, they often give the backstories that don't really get mentioned in the news. In the news, you're seeing the news that happened on that day and the reactions and the comments, but not necessarily the full background story. And NHK, they do great documentaries, and they've actually got very good researchers. Also, for some other important context, as media goes, I mean, NHK in Japan is a lot like PBS in America, even though some people think because it's government broadcasting, they must be like Abe propaganda mouthpieces, which anyone who's had anything to do with NHK or watches it should understand that's absolutely not the case. NHK, like the BBC, like PBS, is, if anything, politically, it's quite liberal, actually. And it's not the place, if they're going to veer in any direction, generally they'll veer towards offending conservatives and nationalists and towards liberalism. And this is kind of reflected in the nature of how they approach history documentaries and how they approach the show. And so the show is recently they rebranded because I think it was becoming known as being so good at explaining news that it still is aimed at kids and it still is in its primetime Sunday time slot. But they have rebranded towards being more of a general explainer without necessarily aiming as directly to kids as before. And this is great for me. I was watching it when I could not understand Japanese well enough to keep up with the news. But then even when I could watch the news, when I got that good at Japanese after a couple of years, I kept watching the show because I found it a really great roundup of the news. It's just one of the things I recommend, and I still enjoy watching every week. I watched it last week, but I missed the first. It's always got two segments. It's about a 40-minute show, and it's got two segments, and I missed the first segment last week, and I saw the second segment. I saw people tweeting about it, and I was like, oh, yeah, people are tweeting about that show. I love it. And it didn't really hit me until Monday that, everyone's upset. And I saw the video that was going around, and what was happening was the Twitter account of this show. Now, this show is a primetime show. It's watched by millions of people. It's shown on NHK1, the main NHK channel, at 6:05 p.m. on Sunday. So it is one of the most watched TV shows in Japan. It's Twitter, by contrast, again, for a little bit of background, the Twitter, most of the tweets on that Twitter, I was looking at the history of them, have about 10 likes. There's not a lot of activity on it. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the people on the show hardly realize at all that it even has a Twitter. I mean, NHK is quite still behind on this sort of thing in the first place. But yeah, the show, after the show, they put out a tweet which featured one of the segments from the show. And the segment that they featured was a quick clip. And the clip, I mean, everybody's probably seen it by now, but a quick summary of the clip that was shared on the NHK account was, hey, on this week's, Sekai no Ima that you can watch on NHK Plus, if you pay your NHK fee, which I do, I live here, it is actually required by law as well. You can actually, it's a hassle to register for, but I did register for it so I could watch the whole things after they've been on the air. You can watch them back like for a week on the free app. So I saw the tweet of this 1 minute 20 segment, and what this was basically a whole lot of the show always has an animated mini explainer of some part of it, and it's not the explainer of the whole thing. They'll be talking about lots of aspects of the background of a problem, and they'll take this one aspect that they want to explain, which specifically in this case, they wanted to explain two data points. One that, in addition to the George Floyd murder and the other triggers to the demonstrations and some of the rioting that happened, of course, after this and the whole boost of why all of this is happening. When they went into the background to all the things going on, which were everything from, from Bush, from Trump, politics, Antifa, white supremacists. They went into a lot of things in the background, but one thing that they went into is how black people in America have been under particular pressure, economically, both generally leading up to all of this with the increasing disparity of wealth. They actually showed a stat I'd never heard and I didn't realize before, that they wanted to convey two stats, basically. And these stats were, one, that black households have an average income 1/7 that of white households in America. And this is the result of a huge widening that's happened in two big spurts, once during the 80s and once since 2010, which ironically was including under Obama. The second thing that the data point that they sort of wanted to show in terms of background was that layoffs and furloughing under coronavirus have disproportionately affected black families. Again, 45% of all layoffs and furloughs due to coronavirus have been black people have been the victims of. However, what they did was they took this explainer and they put it in isolation. They said, this week we're talking about all the demonstrations and riots and what they're about, and they showed this video. This video had two problems. One, this video's purpose was to say that people are angry and have been building up anger because they are economically disadvantaged, and it showed these very grotesque caricatures of black people rioting, some people holding what looked like a TV with fire in it, and people basically acting like they were running wild in a riot situation. And essentially the message that anyone who doesn't know that show, and I guess in Japan everyone knows that show, but outside of Japan, everyone who sees Twitter, 99% of the world who see that tweet wouldn't know anything other than this is an NHK show, and they are explaining that black people are rioting and setting things on fire and they look scary, and where NHK is using a pretty ugly, grotesque caricature of them, and they're rioting because they're poor. And everybody who saw it, who I guess not many people are as fans of the show as I am, and they saw it and they were like, this is completely unacceptable. And I watched the clip and I was shocked as well. I was like, oh my God, how could that show do this badly? They're so good at explaining things. What happened? So I was kind of as stunned. It's funny, I saw people tweeting this on Sunday and it didn't even register. I was like, oh, they're tweeting my show. It's awesome. And then on Monday I started to realize, oh, that's bad. I looked at it and was like, oh, okay, this is bad. So what I decided to do was, I knew that they would do more of an explanation than that, and that couldn't be right, and they couldn't be that tone deaf about what was going on. Was that's how it looked. It looked tone deaf, and yeah, I wanted to give the show a chance. So I went on to NHK Plus. I watched the whole segment, which is 26 minutes long, and I kind of live tweeted everything that it was covering, just to see. Because it looked like it was ignoring the murder aspect, the police brutality aspect, the multiple stories. It looked like it was overlooking that completely. It was also overlooking the fact that most of the demonstrations were multiracial. They were generally peaceful. All these other things, that they were completely misrepresenting the situation. I wanted to check for myself. So what I did was I live tweeted. It ended up being like 35 tweets, which I organized. I posted onto Facebook and I captured images of, and you can see the first 12 of them here. I don't know how to show the other ones, but just for an idea of what was leading up to that segment. I mean, I can read them off here. It's pretty small, but certainly the video, this is terrible. And I love this show and I don't understand what happened. So, they opened the show explaining that the protests, which happened in Osaka as well, but they were triggered by a white policeman murdering a black person. Then they were showing the initial riots, the result of the initial riots with boarded up buildings, followed by mentioning that now they are mostly peaceful protests. The show basically set up a whole bunch of props saying that they wanted to look at what led up to this, what led to this sort of outpouring that happened as a result of this. And they basically said that they were going to explain the history of police violence triggering riots, and they did this showing actual footage of the Rodney King beating, followed by the riots that followed that. And the presenter, the presenter, they always have an explainer, and then they have like someone who acts as like a commenter who's there, who sort of reacts to everything. basically the presenters were saying they wanted to look into why does this keep happening, so they wanted to look at the history of police violence and why these sort of why things don't improve and why these sort of protests and rioting occurred. And the first comment that they made was that white police officers act differently. They often act with fear towards minorities, and this results partly in black people being 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. And again, looking at the stats, the commenters agree that this happens often to where black people have done nothing wrong. And they all agree, well, that looks like the statistics indicate that, that's systemic racism. So they kind of started out with all the right sort of things, and they came in and were basically saying this indicates racism by police. And then they go, let's go into the background of, what are the other factors that are leading into this outpouring? And then they go into this video, and it goes on afterwards, and they talk about lots of other sorts of things. But the point is, so the overall clip, if you watch the whole 26 minutes, which you can't watch online, if you don't have an NHK account, you are stuck with that out of context video, which is bad. So the overall 26 minutes thing on the show was actually quite well done, and it was quite comprehensive. It was actually very comprehensive. It was well done, but they just to pick out that clip, in isolation, one, that looks like an incomplete explanation, which rightfully outraged a whole bunch of people, and two, the people who are not familiar with the show, there's another thing to this, which is that while the caricatures, they were not sort of blackface, sort of traditional sort of racist caricatures per se. They were very muscular, and some had afros, and some had quite dark skin. But they were kind of cool looking. They were very muscular, overly muscular, like pro wrestlers. But again, this animated sequence does this every week. They didn't do it this week. Actually, this week they featured locusts. I guess they wanted to play it safe. But they actually feature characters always done the same sort of way. They had the Hong Kong protesters the same way. If they have Putin, Putin, it kind of makes sense actually. But generally they always the person who does the animation does it in this style. Now. So there is that kind of mitigating it, but certainly in isolation, this thing just looked awful. It looked awful to me, and I love the show. So there was the initial sort of outpouring, and a few days later, NHK kind of said, hey, look, this was part of a whole big show where we explained it much better. But we didn't explain that properly, that full context properly, so we're sorry and we're taking it down, which was kind of the initial NHK published an apology in Japanese, but it didn't really address the problems of how the animation clip looked. It didn't address a lot of aspects, a lot of problems with this. They said we did explain the whole thing, and we weren't missing the police violence aspect that was in the rest of the video, but we're sorry that we posted out of context. And so they kind of skipped over the whole thing about how insensitive the video also looked. What was interesting is tonight, the same show actually started, and I believe that Bae was at NHK this evening as well, and you probably saw the whole apology thing. They did a long apology tonight, and I'm suspecting that they got some help, maybe from Mr. McNeil, on doing a proper apology. Hey, Nesta125, good to see you there in the comments, by the way. Yeah, they probably got some help. I know the apology tonight was a lot more comprehensive, including the style of portrayal. Creating the impression that the protesters were not just peacefully protesting, but they were rioting. It showed everyone was rioting, and they were aggressive. Again, it's kind of the silly style that they do for this every week, but on such a sensitive topic, it wasn't considerate the way that they did it, and they acknowledged that. They acknowledged the out-of-context thing. They did 2 long 90-degree bows. They really did as about as thorough an apology for it as they could have done, which I thought was good. So Bai's got a comment there. Just to be clear, they were not caricatures of black people. They were caricatures of stereotypes of black people. Yeah, that clip was so racist, it didn't speak well for the show. Well, agree. Again, my comment is that the style of animation, the way it portrayed people, well, you could say it was racist because it's racist towards everybody, that it portrays white people, black people. It does this every week, I don't know if being consistently racist mitigates being racist. Probably doesn't. Actually, that's an excellent point. And maybe they're going to look at that. Certainly, they did not have, pro wrestler racist caricatures of the locusts tonight, but that was probably a deliberate choice of news subject. So yes, good. Certainly the clip just looks stupid at best, actually. So there was that. But as Bai mentioned as well, we were both watching the apology tonight, and Bai's evaluation, the apology they gave tonight was the most sincere, moving apology I've seen in 16 years here. I agree. It was actually it was actually pretty comprehensive. In fact, well, in some ways, this is the problem. You kind of don't want to invite the outrage culture. There'll always be people who will attack whatever you do. I kind of wish they'd put it online so that I hope they do put it online so that people can see, because I think it is very well done, but then people are going to bash on something else. So I think they've done what they need to do in terms of using the airtime of the show. They got someone who was very important looking. I don't know who he was, but I assume he was quite high up. And they did actually a really comprehensive job compared to the very short written apology during the week. That was kind of like, I'm sorry you didn't understand me. And it's stupid, so I just took it away. That wasn't a very good apology during the week. And a lot of people mentioned, hey, they apologized and they took it down, but they didn't seem to get what was wrong. Tonight they really did come across as, kind of actually getting it. Which, credit to NHK. I'm granted, I admit I'm a fan. I'm sympathetic, but I know that if anything, they have a liberal bias, and I think they kind of came through tonight. So credit to them for that. They actually put on board how they're going to be a lot more careful in future. The animation itself. I mean, here's a screen capture. I just took a photo of the TV for this, but they talked about the anime itself was that they were trying to make it easy to explain the economic data aspect of it in an easy to understand way, and it was checked both by the editorial desk and the manager of the show. It was constantly checked. However, they were not sufficiently considerate towards the way that that black people were portrayed, or indeed the diversity of people and their own human rights in the way that they portrayed it, and they recognized that it was hurtful towards people. Again, I can't show the second capture of this, but they recognized that the impact on this was hurtful towards people, and that was sort of their bad. So wokeness has reached Japan. Oliver Cromwell. Well, if your name is Oliver Cromwell, then yes, you probably, I imagine that the moment they stopped cutting people's heads off, I'm sure it's all been downhill for you. But look, they did the right thing. They acknowledged, that people were hurt by this, and they gave a long explanation. So, but yeah. So anyway, it was good to see them come through. It is actually a good show. Here is the punchline to this. Although there are people who never watch this show, who pledge that they are never going to watch this show after this, or watch NHK, which they probably don't watch NHK. They certainly don't pay the NHK fee. But I tell you, to me, NHK is the only thing worth watching on TV. On Minpo, on the public, on the commercial broadcast channels, it's just the same Tarento over and over, just talking stupidly about stuff and just trying to figure out, it's like watching a grandparent's Facebook feed. They just try to find things to make people angry. NHK is actually, to me, worth paying for and worth watching. I'm glad that they did the right thing with this anyway, and congrats. I mean, look, Bio McNeil's done a lot of things this week. He contributed to a lot of the commentary, which no doubt influenced the enhanced awareness by NHK. Actually got a very long article in Toyo Keizai published, which was translated by a bunch of people, I think, but actually explained his own perspectives on this, including the need for protest in certain circumstances, and indeed the need for action. And this is an interesting one. I respect, but I don't think I have to agree with every word that you say. I think we could disagree on things. I think we agree in the big picture. Certainly the principles and the need for the Black Lives movement and everything that's happening around that, I certainly agree with. I still have reservations about the use of actual rioting and property damage and violence. And this is something which I also saw a lot of Japanese reaction to it. to that article, actually, it was featured in a different place on the Nichan blog that I quite like following. A lot of the comments there were like, yeah, you shouldn't be justifying, you know, violence. Bia's article, which is very long, and I won't cover all the detail of it here, but he actually summarized it on your own blog. Actually, it was translated into Japanese, but Bia's blog is worth reading about this, actually. And he goes into explaining how simply, you know, passive peaceful protest doesn't always get things done. Sometimes to get people's attention, you know, sometimes things happen when things, you know, when you talk about looting, you know, black people in America have been looted. Their labor has been looted. Their, you know, the wealth that they've created has been looted from a long time back. They don't have that foundation of capital that you have based on your efforts when you landed in America, and you know they've been behind based on that. And you know, people basically, when you look at it in that context, the notion of doing more direct action makes sense, and he explains the rationale for it. I admit it's logical, although of course I think it's more credible and more persuasive to people, and it's part of the reason that the movement has become so drawn so much attention globally is much more to do with the huge amount of participation and support in peaceful protests. And indeed, in the face of those peaceful protests, the overreaction of the police has done a lot more to get sympathy, I think, than the you know, the extreme reactions, which I can sympathize with, but you can never say, all right, you know, that happened immediately after the event. That's just me. But look, good things are happening, and you know, I don't know. Some days you feel like the world is just hopeless, and sometimes you see it improve. And this as well. The thing this also reminds me a little bit of is another one of Bayo's own exploits. On the blackface thing, there was a big thing about this where there would be blackface on Japanese TV, and there was always kind of the argument that it's funny. Let me put it this way: the difficult thing about racism is that quite often some people are so ignorant that they believe that their ignorance makes them innocent of the crime of it. And this is the thing. And what Bai has done in his time in Japan that I respect the most is he's done an awful lot to you know, through his outreach through different media and so on, to at least take away, not that, well, one, there's a question of whether you should ever have the defense of being so ignorant that you actually should be allowed to get away with racism, but he's done a lot to impact taking this away. A great example of this was the blackface thing, where, you know, of course America has a very specific history of blackface and a very specific context that's, you know, well, not just America. There's some in Europe as well. In fact, you know, and in Europe has a terrible history with Africa, of course. I mean, starting with the slave trade, you know, starting with the exporting, the international trafficking of people, starting with that came out of Europe. But America has a very specific context, and a lot of people would say, hey, when Japanese people are doing a tribute to Eddie Murphy or jazz bands or whatever, and they're trying to make themselves look like the artist that they like by darkening their faces, you know, they're not doing that with the same kind of mocking, belittling, dehumanizing intent that people in the deep racist South in the 19th century were necessarily doing. However, you know, and it's not reasonable to expect people in Japan to know that history. But of course, what happened on the Rat Star thing, and again, partly due to his action, was a lot of people came out and, well, including him, and said, well, if you didn't know, now you know, let me tell you. And, you know, in a way, some people were just acting so angry. And you had people being angry at the racism and people saying, well, I didn't intend to be racist, and getting angry back, and nothing, no bridge being explained between that. And what Bai has really contributed is that he's gotten into the Japanese media and the local media a lot. And he's not just come in with the pure, oh, that's racist, stop it. He's actually taken the time and had the patience to educate around this. And it's really, once you have that understanding, you can't be uneducated about it. You know, you lose, well, setting aside whether you should ever accept ignorance as a form of innocence in the first place, if you want to claim it, you certainly lose it once you know. And that's what's happened. And the result of that is that it's changed measurably. It's changed Japanese media, culture in Japan. It's actually had a measurable impact. You do not see this sort of thing. I don't think since that's happened, I think that made such a big noise, people are not going to do it again. And this sort of thing as well is going to be another case like that. in law school, there is a thing about this, and it's something that you get in a lot of situations where people will claim, I see people on Twitter sometimes claiming that they were assaulted by someone who bumped into them. And there's the thing about whether it was on purpose or not. And this is the thing, when I was in law school, on day one of law school, they explained to you assault. I mean, the easiest idea to think of a crime as assault, punching someone in the face. And there's always the thing where, you ask a normal person, what is assault? And you'll say, assault is getting punched in the face. And what do you need to prove? Well, that's easy. You just prove that you got punched in the face. And the teacher says, aha, no. They actually have to prove two things. Getting punched in the face is only half of what you have to prove. That's the easy part, because anyone can see that you got punched in the face. The second thing that they have to prove is mens rea. They have to prove that you had the intent in anger to punch someone in the face, and that it wasn't an involuntary action, or it wasn't that you tripped and were reaching out to stop your fall, or you weren't trying to save them from getting run over or something like that, that it wasn't a misunderstood situation. And people often skip that aspect out, but I think there are situations, there's a situation which goes beyond that, where you can claim to have not done something on purpose, but have been so negligent, or it being so common sense, that you don't get the excuse anymore. A good example is drunk driving. It used to be that drunk driving used to be that if you ran someone over when you were drunk, the fact you were drunk was treated as mitigating your intent to run them over, because you were so drunk you couldn't have intended to run anyone over. And the laws all changed around this to say, well, if you drove a car drunk, the moment you decided to drink and drive, you were pretty much constructively making the decision for the consequences that followed from that. And I think it's a lot like that around these sorts of conversations. Once you decide to do something, there's a certain point where people will, even if you don't have the intent, you should have had the common sense to see it coming, to see the outcome coming. And, and once that common sense is established, even if it didn't exist before, then you don't get to drink drive anymore. And that's kind of what's happening with Japan and media. They're not allowed to drink drive with racism anymore. The law's kind of changing, and Bai's done a big part of that. So salutations to you, sir, on getting, on helping with that. And, it's not about paying specifically for Americans or whatever. It's just simply being considerate towards people, and not not ignorantly and unintentionally, but nonetheless consequently harming people. I mean, that's what you're trying to avoid in the end of the day. So anyway, that is what that is about. Let's go into other stories that we've got this week. There's a bunch of other things. Good night, Andrea, my boy. Good to see you. Today sucks. Just an update. We had 47 cases today in Tokyo. This is after having about 20 cases, 25 cases every day all of this week. That said, that's the bad news. The good news is that these are not like random cases popping up all over the place. So it does sound like a number that would indicate a second wave in Tokyo. Remember, Tokyo Prefecture is 14 million people. The prefecture is all around Tokyo. Like I believe that Kanagawa, the second biggest prefecture in Japan, is like 9.7 million or something like that. You add them all together, it's about 30 million, like for greater urban sort of Tokyo. So you are talking about from a big pool of people. The good news is that 18 of these cases that came up today came from one specific host club. It came from Kabukicho, the red light district. So you'd think, oh, all these cases, 22 cases from Kabukicho, which is the red light district in Shinjuku, and you'd think, oh, this is Japanese going out and using prostitutes right away, these dirty old men going and getting disease, spreading disease again because they can't keep it in the pants, is what you'd think. But actually, no, these are actually ladies going out to a host bar. So for a start, I won't even get into the entire spectrum. There is such a huge spectrum of adult entertainment in Japan that goes from literally sitting and having someone pour drinks and laugh at your jokes to of course the logical end. I think in the West it really is just straight to the end. There aren't 100 degrees in between, but in Japan there really are. But the thing is, I wouldn't say that host clubs are as common as hostess clubs at all. Probably like 1%. There are, if you do want to go to one, they are in Kabukicho, and they will have what are considered by certain types of Japanese people to be attractive men. They do themselves up. They wear suits. They pour champagne, and they basically act like the toy boy fantasy of the women who go along. One interesting note as well. You'd think that these would be dissatisfied wives and maybe single, middle-aged, well-to-do women willing to go pay for a man to keep them company. But it's actually a lot of the customers at those host clubs are actually women who work at hostess bars, who spend the whole night looking after men and laughing at their jokes that they want to be waited on. So they take some of their money and they go to host clubs. It's also a way that some of the hostesses get roped into those jobs, is by wanting to keep paying for the host bars. But in any case, there was one particular host bar where they decided to celebrate coming out from lockdown with a big party, as you do. Apparently part of the party was they filled glasses with champagne and they passed them around, everybody drinking from the same glass. And today, 18 of those people were diagnosed with COVID-19, so that didn't work out very well. There have been other cases from the same place in the last few days. So that kind of sucks. And there are 22 other cases, 22 cases in total, so 6 other cases from Kabukicho. So there's a lot of discussion going on about how to manage this. One is that they're thinking about having extensive testing for people who work in Kabukicho and other red light districts to make sure that they can at least make sure that the staff are not spreading so much. Another thing is that they're talking about bringing in a requirement for contact tracing. Which is, i.e. they want to collect all the information of all the people who attend these clubs, which I guess would be a pretty big discourage of business as well. But there again, if someone there, brings it in, they've got to know how to find and test all the other people if there are clusters. So they're looking at doing that. Another 7 cases, by the way, were from Kogane Hospital. This is a hospital that actually had a cluster that was known about 2 weeks ago, and it's still producing cases. So the cluster approach, if you take all of those cases together, there are actually 25 of the 47 were basically from previously known clusters, and these were like the follow-up, going and checking everybody connected with these places and diagnosing them. So that's kind of good, although now they have to test the people who connected with those people. It's a big task, obviously, but still. So it's not quite a case of all the cases not being known. They are basically centered around known clusters. The main concern, I suppose, is that, one, Tokyo is heading towards a full release from lockdown on the 19th of June, and that number makes it look like that might not be a good idea. Right now, the government says, given that most of them are associated with known clusters, they are still going to focus on those clusters, and they're not thinking about delaying the ending of the current lockdown, quasi-lockdown that we have. But it still indicates that there is a lot of spread still. So we'll have to see what consequence that has. But that was interesting. More coverage. Unseen Japan did a nice summary of what's going on. Particularly, a lot of people covering this don't seem to understand or acknowledge that this is part of a bigger show, which I suppose when you're talking about the problem of the tweet itself, certainly the tweet was horrific. Even with the context that I had, it was horrific. And I love the show, and I saw it. I was like, oh my God, what the hell is this? Let alone someone who doesn't even have the context. And it wasn't appropriate the way that they posted it. It was misleading and wrong. And a lot of people covered it that way. I was glad to see, one, the way the show itself dealt with the issue tonight, and again, the show actually did handle the issue really well. I've enjoyed following Arisha in Tokyo's non-native creative channel. I've recommended it here a couple of times. She's just started a new series, including one here. I got the paperback of one of the authors that was shown on her podcast that I find them all really good. They're creative people from different pursuits, but basically who live in Japan or other places around Asia generally, who are away from their home countries, who talk both about living and being creative in a non-native country. And this one, to me, at least the topic really resonated to me, and it's on the importance of taking time off and being sufficiently rested in this age, particularly if you're, like what I do. I'm in a job where you're constantly busy, and it's like pointing out that a lot of the greatest, most sort of the biggest achievers in history often did that based upon a lot of rest and a lot of thinking time and a lot of time off. And it is true that I have a job where I'm required to do a lot of big thinking and solving big problems, and it's really hard to do that when you're constantly frazzled and overwhelmed with work. This person's actually taking a framework from this. He worked in actual AI development and system engineering, and he took a lot of time off and actually looked at the history of how different people throughout different time periods in history, but the different systems that people used towards getting great things sort of done, and how they sort of managed to incorporate, and actually how important taking time off was. We live in an age where people are trying to be so busy. I loved the discussion. It was an hour-long discussion, but it was really, to me, it really resonated. So I rushed out and got the book, and I'm going to read the book, and I'm going to tell you what it was like. But yeah, go check out Non-Native Creative. It's a great podcast blog, and yeah, that's a good thing. Why did I include this? I don't know why I included this in the topics. I think there must have been but never mind. Well, WHO, which still exists in spite of America deciding to let the CDC handle everything, I don't know, maybe with guns and whatnot, pouring bleach inside and shining UVC light on people to try to fix it. Yeah, there are trials of vaccines that are happening in the UK, which is a good thing to see. Still, obviously, even to trial these things takes so much time. We shouldn't be expecting anything for 18 months at least from like February. So I think we're going to be with this for a long time and with multiple waves. But that's a good thing, and indeed debate already happening if that comes out. The United Kingdom, and by the way, I've been rightfully dinged. Speaking of insufficient workers, especially someone called Oliver Cromwell in here. I had people point out to me, particularly people from the non-English parts of the UK, pointing out that sometimes when I see a graph in Japanese, I admit it does this to me. It's like how the Netherlands is called Oranda and the United Kingdom is called Igiris. Japan is guilty of like picking out the biggest element of countries and naming the whole countries after them, and it switches my brain into that mode. And my sister lives in London. So I must admit I'm guilty of saying England instead of UK, and I apologize to the many people I have obviously I've offended about that. But anyway, the UK, just after deciding that it really needed to leave the world's best trading bloc, immediately decides now it really needs to join the world's second best trading bloc. And they're seeking a swift deal with Japan and entering the TPP. Also, interestingly, that again, this is another one that America decided that they didn't need to be a part of after they did 2 years of negotiations to get into it. And now China's saying, hey, you know what, maybe we want to join that thing. And again, this is going to be really bad for America if that happens. But I mean, America, you get what you vote for. Well, actually, you don't necessarily get what you vote for, but you get what you vote for under the electoral system that you have, and that's your electoral system. So remember to vote is the thing. By the way, I've been very encouraged, on an aside, how even with crazy voter suppression, like I believe in Georgia and Atlanta, there was only like one polling booth or something ridiculous, and people were like, had to line up for hours and hours. I mean, it was so overtly suppressing of votes, and yet queues of miles with people who took chairs knowing that it was going to happen. That's the thing. In the end of the day, if you do actually vote, if you do actually turn out, it can make a difference. This was it. When Obama won, it was a large turnout. When Trump came out, it was the lowest turnout in 20 years. It makes a difference. It's not just gerrymandering. But setting all that aside, so UK is trying to get into a free trade zone with Australia and New Zealand and Japan. And it's kind of funny. I mean, New Zealand's economy was destroyed by England joining the EU and cutting all the ties to New Zealand. It's nice that they want to come back again, but there's a question of what they're bringing on the table. And they basically want the same deal that the EU has with Japan. But, of course, the UK isn't offering what the UK can offer. They're not in the same negotiating position. I did have a quick think this week about what I would like from the UK, of course, starting with butter and dairy products. Although, of course, we have better ones in New Zealand and Australia, but we couldn't negotiate a deal that would actually break down Japanese trade barriers to that. So go for it, UK, on that. And there are a few specific snacks that I listed that I would like. There are UK snacks. Oh, and cooked breakfasts. UK is actually pretty good until midday in terms of food. So all of that I would very much like. Tikka too, you voted for me. Well, I won't say that was a wasted vote. I do appreciate the sentiment. I didn't even, you know what I was meaning to put on here? I was meaning to find how Martin Shkreli, the Kim Jong-un's sister, younger sister, she's going crazy. There was actually, I should talk about North Korea quickly. North Korea is going nuts right now. All of a sudden, there was like periodically, escapees from North Korea send over like pamphlets and balloons over to North Korea saying, hey, Kim Jong-un sucks. And, this goes back and forth. There've been propaganda speakers. There's been all this stuff happening for years. But all of a sudden, Kim Jong-un's younger sister has come out. I don't know what Kim Jong-un is doing. He might not even be around anymore. But she's come out and she's suddenly saying, hey, we're gonna drop bombs on you if you don't stop these balloons. So, of course, South Korea did as South Korea does. Right now, the government in South Korea is actually very North Korea sympathetic and friendly. So they sort of said, hey, of course, we're going to stop them and arrest all of the people, all of the defectors who are sending these across. We're going to actually police it all of a sudden, even though we let them do it. And in spite of that, they're going, no, we're going to cut off all the lines. And today, North Korea is saying we're preparing to take military measures against South Korea. The way it looks to me, just my amateur reading the news, but kind of interested in North Korea kind of situation, is one, it looks like they're trying to position the Kim Jong-un's sister as a new leader, possibly successor. Who knows? Maybe she's already taken over. But she's suddenly come out and she's acting very, very tough. And she's acting tough where there's been really no provocation to speak of from the South, which implies that, well, one, it implies that they're trying to make her look important and strong, and two, it looks like they're trying to distract. I mean, basically, North Korea acts like this whenever it's really, really in a bad situation. And two things, Japanese media is pointing out two things are happening in North Korea right now. North Korea still has the admirable situation of having had 0 coronavirus cases. However, the population is being wiped out by people with high fevers and pneumonia. They're refusing to call it COVID-19. However, this high fever and pneumonia pandemic within North Korea that is probably unique to North Korea is apparently causing a lot of damage there. And in addition to that, because China has closed the border with North Korea, that has also hurt the economy, and it's allegedly causing outbreaks of famine. So North Korea domestically is actually, apparently, in spite of the outward projection that everything is fine in North Korea, they are not. And that's probably why they're acting crazy, and don't think of it as empty rhetoric. If they're really as internally destabilized as they're starting to look, it could mean that they could be ready to do something kind of outrageous, one, to distract attention and to sort of get all the people domestically together in spite of, possible dissent happening over the way the government's handling things right now. And to boost the position of, Martin Shkreli, aka, what's her name? Kim Yo-jung, the younger sister. So that's an interesting situation. What else have we got here? Yeah, so I mentioned before how the government's thinking to try to address the problem of adult entertainment, nightlife, they call it. But they're not talking about going. Well, they probably are thinking of going dancing. They probably think of that as the same as prostitution, given the way that they regulate. But they're thinking really more specifically about girly bars and, kabuki and red light districts. And they are thinking to they recognize that as the probably biggest risk of reopening and introducing proper contact tracing and contact information from people who go to those places. Honestly, I don't think... even if lots of people, in fact, it's actually pretty normal. I've been to hostess bars, I've been out with friends and so on. It's a pretty big part of the economy and a pretty normal thing in Japan. And bearing in mind, it doesn't mean that you're going necessarily to a house of ill repute. It's actually, there are lots of places where it's just conversation and drinks. And it's widely done. However, even that, I would be like, hold on for another couple of months, I think, before that's a good idea. I don't really understand the mentality of people that really need to go out and do that now. And yes, just like the movie The Seventh Seal, just like with the unraveling signs of impending apocalypse, 70 monkeys escaped from a Chiba zoo. They say that it looked like it was a man-made hole, but who knows, that could have been a monkey-made hole. They got out, they were rounded up, there was a temporary panic, there were news alerts. But yes, they were eventually rounded up by 8 p.m. I believe, and still no damages caused by them. But yes, monkeys can be pretty hairy. They can cause a lot of issues. So that was a thing. Hey, Tai Nakamura, good to see you, and Mr. T, good to see you. Ohio, Mr. T. Tai Nakamura, just a simple track, but I'm glad you liked it. Thank you for listening to it. But yeah, so that was a thing. Oh yeah, another interesting one. Well, so I know everyone's basically been saying inside Japan and outside of Japan that Japan's been doing it wrong. There is an interesting aspect to this. I did go on a little bit of a tweet rant about this week as well, how A lot of people, there's a tendency for a lot of the international English-speaking community that I see in Japan, when talking about this, one pointing out incessantly how Japan's doing it all wrong, how they are not doing contact tracing, how they are not. Hey, the J-Vlog, good to see you as well. They are, not doing proper sufficient testing. They have improved this quite a lot, but they certainly weren't. And everyone in Japan felt the same thing. When they were getting 35% of all submitted tests coming back positive, that implied that they were not testing enough at all. And there are a lot of people just saying, I never trust anything that the Japanese government says, and the response is too slow. And then the government said, okay, they're going to send everybody cash and masks, and some people are still waiting for the cash and some people are still waiting for the masks, and they screwed up both of those. The Japanese government's popularity, in spite of doing a lot better than most countries, has been plummeting, just because the Japanese people feel like the response here hasn't been sufficient. However, in spite of this, so it's become the sort of a mystery where everybody's been so universally condemning, not just foreigners, but also, Japanese commentators as well, on the Japanese response being kind of disorganized and insufficient. And yet somehow Japan has had this outcome, even today with 47 cases and no deaths. They're having thousands of cases, in Brazil, I think they're having like 1,900 cases a day. In America, UK, they're still up in the hundreds, close to 1,000. And think about that. 300 people is a full airliner. 2 or 3 airliners crashing every day. 15,000 people in America, 45,000 people in the UK. UK has the highest rate per population of deaths in the world. And yet, and by all, and yet it's people from these countries quite often. Those countries are doing very aggressive testing, and they are fighting this very hard, and it's kind of funny. People in Japan as well acknowledge, hey, we should be trying to test everyone like they are, but at the same time, somehow Japan has kind of come out with this outcome where we are still definitely not out of the woods at all, and Japanese people are just as vulnerable to this as anyone else. But clearly the disease hasn't spread as much, and there's a lot of people, including Rochelle Kopp, who's been doing a lot of sort of collecting anecdotes and information to try to analyze, like, what is that thing about Japan that's made the outcome better in Japan. Well, they actually have an interview here in the Japan Times with the architect of Japan's strategy, where he points out what he thinks was successful about the Japan approach and what the flaws of the Western approach was. And what it really boils down to is he said that, look, we knew in Japan we were not prepared for this. We didn't have enough tests. We didn't have enough hospital beds or anything ready. We knew that we could rapidly end up in a situation like New York, where the hospitals could become overwhelmed really fast. We, rather than try to be superhuman and do what we can't, we looked at what we had, and rather than try to test everybody, we focused only on, we actually accepted that there would be a degree of community spread and that we couldn't test everybody. And rather than trying to do that, instead we focused on having a system that was set up based on contact tracing and focusing on clusters. If there was a hotel or a bar or a school where there'd be multiple cases, they would focus all the resources on contact tracing and finding everyone connected with that cluster and focus on those clusters, acknowledging that that approach will not mean 0 cases or eradication. It will not eliminate it from the community, but it will be a way to manage the worst outbreaks of spread, to focus on that. Korea did something similar, but of course Korea had so much testing, they allowed anyone to come up and get themselves tested, so they had really comprehensive testing available on top of really aggressive chasing of clusters. Japan just decided they didn't have that framework, so they just decided that they would focus the resources that they had on clusters, and that's where we are so far, where it hasn't gone totally out of control. His suggestion, and it's as good as any, I mean, this is the guy who actually was the government advisor that set up this approach. His suggestion was that the reason things have turned out worse in Europe and the US is because they tried too hard to test everybody and to trace everybody, and their systems got really overwhelmed really quickly trying to do that. In the end of the day, when they were trying to treat every individual case and try to contact trace around every individual case and test people, those systems, those hospitals, they couldn't handle that. That's as far as I sort of understand it based on a skim read. Obviously, it's not the whole story at all, and it's I don't think it's braggy. A lot of people get very sensitive about this. Either way, when Taro Aso said that it was due to Japan's success was due to Japan's Mindo, it's a societal tribal level. I talked about this last week. That was a terrible phrase to use, and it sounded like gloating, which this is something no one should ever be gloating about. You know, we're still definitely we could become like Russia or Brazil or New York tomorrow here, and we shouldn't take that for granted. I have not gotten on a car or a train or a bus in 3.5 months, which is nuts. Actually, this is why I'm running so much, because I feel really cooped up here. I'm lucky I can work from home, but yeah. I mean, certainly I like it much better as an explanation than bowing. Some people, there's a lot of ethnologists who are going on saying that Asian people don't get it. They've got different genes. I don't think that's it. There was an interesting one. They said that type O people have a 15%. When they did an analysis of people, when 23andMe did a sample of 70,000 people and looked at people who had it, it seemed that O type people had a 15% less propensity to catching it, which isn't to say that they don't get it. They just seem to get it less. Again, that's not very well understood, but team type O, yes. But you know what that means? Because actually Japanese define themselves. Japan has a lot of type A's, and not as many type O's as in Europe or America. They define, when they're pulling out their stupid ethnic stereotypes and national stereotypes based on blood types, they say Americans act like type O's because they have more type O's over there. So obviously it's not, type O in itself isn't a source of relief, but apparently it is a benefit. So, you know, there's a never-ending list of weird explanations. But from the guy who actually did the strategy, you know, and the government, what I also know about Japan and what the news has been indicating is that while they're pretty terrible at reacting the first time something happens, some great examples of disastrous reactions, for example, the Kobe earthquake. A lot of the very positive reaction to the Great East Japan earthquake, and I'm not talking about Fukushima. I'm talking about the earthquake where they got the highways fixed within days, and they did a lot of the recovery. It was amazing. Like to the tsunami, how quickly they were able to do a lot of the key recovery was based on the manuals that created from the Kobe earthquake, which was such a complete disaster. But they spent years sort of analyzing what went wrong and building up systems to handle these things better. We're all a lot better off and a lot safer because of the disaster that was the Kobe earthquake. Which bear in mind as well, in Kobe, there was no rescue for like more than 72 hours. The city was cut off. And most of the people who died in fires because they left the gas on powering these fires. So, you know, I mean, they did everything the opposite of the way you're supposed to do pretty much in reaction to this. It caused a lot of needless loss of life. But in this case as well, there's been a lot of analysis now as to everything that was screwed up in the first wave. And there's a lot of preparations going on for the second and third and fourth waves, including preparation of more testing and better testing frameworks, the same sort of drive-through testing like they have in Korea, the same better equipping of hospitals, acknowledging the problems of hospitals turning people away and taking measures to address that. It's all quiet, but you know, it's been covered in the news, and I assume that they're going to be addressing these same issues a lot better when they happen the next time around. In spite of all of that, and in spite of the 47 cases today, the Economic Revitalization Minister did say that given that most of the cases are from known clusters, they are not changing the plan to drop most restrictions on Tokyo on June 19. Oh yeah, the other big story for today. A woman in Adachi-ku, kind of one of the less economically well-off wards in Tokyo. A young woman climbed over kind of a high barrier to like a canal or a river, sort of cemented over a river, apparently to try to commit suicide, to kill herself, at 5:30 in the morning. So she climbed over this fence and she jumped into the water and started drowning. Some old lady, a 70-year-old lady who saw this, started shouting. And apparently right where she entered the water was apparently right beside a sumo dormitory. And 20 wrestlers who were just waking up at 5:30 in the morning immediately all ran down to the river, charging into the water to rescue her. And they called paramedics to come and get them. But then there was this problem that there was like this 2-meter high barrier, which they had to climb over to get into the river to go get her. And then when the paramedics came, they had to put her on a stretcher and lift her over this thing. But again, the sumo wrestlers were there and they do nothing but lift weights and train. So yeah, the 20 sumo wrestlers basically passed her stretcher up over the barrier to rescue her and save her life. So if they don't make that into a movie, seriously, I mean, Hollywood, you've been put on notice. I mean, I don't know. This is like, what better movie subject could you have? Foreign worker visas. If your dream is to come to Japan and work in a convenience store, and not just while you're on a student visa and looking to make a little bit of extra cash, and certainly not on the horrible apprentice visa program, the opportunity is coming. The government is looking to add working visas, not just for English teaching and being bankers and military colonels and whatever, but also for being convenience store. I think it's an acknowledgement. This is from lobbying from the convenience stores themselves, that they cannot find staff in Japanese people willing to work the hours and for the money that you have in convenience stores, and that's reflected in, if you go into any convenience store, particularly in Tokyo, but probably anywhere in Japan nowadays, it's pretty much impossible to go to a convenience store and not see in any given store at least one. Sometimes you see nothing but foreign stuff. This is an area where we are. It is low wage. It's not. These are not the best jobs, but a lot of people work in them, and it's good that they're going to be able to allow convenience store chains to give people working visas to be in Japan. The other day, I recommended a whole bunch of Netflix 2022. Thank you. I think that's an excellent idea. I recommended a bunch of YouTube channels that I've been enjoying watching lately the other day. One that I just picked out to show on here. I put a whole thread, so you can find this in my Twitter. All of this you can find in my Twitter, by the way, and you can always talk with me, so feel free to do that. Answers with Joe. I've really been enjoying this channel lately. He's got a very nice delivery, and he just picks fascinating subjects that he just explains really well. I think he gets help. He must get help. He couldn't possibly. He's like the smartest person in the world if he can actually, off the top of his head, recite the explanations that he gives. No one could. But he talks about really cool, really interesting, and quite complex, just random cool stuff. And he just explains it really well. There's a lot of stuff like this on YouTube, and I recommended a lot of channels like this. But I'm finding I'm really loving almost everything that this guy puts on the web lately. So I'm a real fan of this channel, and and this is why I'm watching more YouTube than I'm watching TV or Netflix, and I recommend this one. I think I'm almost there. Here is Japanese TV talking again about the mystery of Factor X as to why Japan is doing so well. These are death rates per population, per 100,000 population. UK coming up worst, followed by Italy, America. Obviously no Russia or Brazil or anything like that, so maybe these are not totally up to date now. But pointing out Japan 0.7, Korea 0.5, and China 0.3. And I'm sure probably similar results for Taiwan, for example. But there again, you can see that there are other countries in Asia that have taken very different approaches. Again, I'd also be interested to see where I believe Australia and New Zealand line up comparably with Japan and South Korea as well. So the problem with this view is it makes it look like European countries and America doing badly and Asian countries doing well. That's not strictly the case. If you take Oceania, for example, so it is a mystery. And, Japan's achieved a kind of similar end result, not quite as successful as South Korea, but through a very different approach. So that's what I was talking about before, how a lot of people are starting to try to figure out what that is. This is just me sharing too much information on the internet. I'm doing a good job of losing weight. I am, in the absence of not riding buses, trains, or even cars or taxis. I've been running every second day since the Achilles got fixed. I've been doing that a lot more. I've been managing my portions pretty well. I haven't really been eating out at all. So I've actually gone down since we started this whole lockdown on March 8, where I was 84.8 kilograms. I'm now the other day I was 77.4. Today I was 78. But I'm actually coming down. Again, the ideal, and this is not a Japanese standard, the global standard for my height, for my BMI, is I should be between 73 and 84 kilograms, basically. I can actually be anything from 63 to 83, and the ideal middle is like 73. And I always told myself if I got to 78, I'd be happy, and that was what I said is my goal. And lately I've gotten to that, for only the second time I've ever been in Japan in 22 years. So I guess I must admit I'm treating it a bit like a prison routine. I'm trying to stop the days all blending together. I have been at home and I have not left my train station for 3.5 months. and I'm working from home, and I get to the evening some days and I realize I've been working since 8 a.m. without a break. That in itself is kind of disturbing, but yeah, that part of it is going well. Also, re-entry for Japan foreigners is they are easing those issues. That's Martin Shkreli. I mean Kim Yo-jung. Kim Yo-jung. But yeah, she's kind of acting crazy, but that's probably because things are probably really messed up in North Korea right now. And who knows, it could be a coup. She looks like she's taking over, so maybe she's done that. Maybe, and again, again, you've got no way of knowing anything with that country, but it could be that there was a domestic coup and that there are military factions which are aligned with her and are using her as the figurehead for taking over from another faction, or it could be that really Kim Jong-un is actually giving little sis more responsibilities, including hinting at military action against South Korea. So, everyone needs hobbies. That's all the topics we have. The show is, we are over. I did put up a track. I put it on Twitter and Facebook just before the show. Go have a listen. It's 166 BPM, so if nothing else, it should be fun for jogging too. Lots of people have joined. Thank you to everybody who's come in. While I was chatting, I see Mr. T, I see Nesta, I've already said Nesta, I've already said the J-Vlog, I see Christopher Luke, Sainted Sir, indeed, Sumo for the win, they are heroes all, Oliver Cromwell, Dark, as Oliver Cromwell was, very good. Christopher Luke, New Zealand 0.19. Wow, so they did better than, they did very well. I mean, again, being from New Zealand, New Zealand is actually, they use as a test market for a lot of places because it is a small microcosm. It's a lot like a Western, it is a Western country, but it's also an island, and it's you have a very managed environment there for new technologies and things. So it looks like they did a really model case of handling this. But yes, indeed, Bull Burlitz Boy, you just got over here. Well, welcome, Bull Burlitz Boy, and I'm sorry we are finishing now, but look, you can watch the show recorded. Remember, as always, if you like, please like. Salutations again to By McNeil if you're still in there. Very good job, actually really good result tonight. Slow Pete, I see there's someone Slow Pete there who's been saying some weird things, but that's okay. All are welcome, so long as all in good sport. And yes, indeed, I'm gonna, as always, you can follow me on Twitter if you want to keep up with the stuff during the week. Remember to like if you like, subscribe if you want to subscribe. And have a good week, everybody. Stay safe. Continue to stay safe. Of course, we are definitely not out of the woods yet anywhere. And take good care. Check out the music from earlier and have a good one. Boom. Peace. Walking in the rain. That sounds very deep. Thank you, Quint Rangard. Much appreciated. Have a good one, everyone.